Welcome to Haggie Reads for You on Wolf Spirit Radio. Colleen, Haggie, reads children's stories for the wee ones up to the teens. She also reads books for grown-ups. Tune in, kick back, relax, and listen in. You're listening to Wolf Spirit Radio.
Hi, everyone. This is Colleen, and this is Haggie Reads for You. And today is Tuesday, October 27, 2015. And today I'm going to pick up where I left off last week with the Zephyrus Archives, Mission of Eternity by T.J. Glenn. Although I think I am going to read the very last paragraph that I read last week over again, just kind of to pick up a little bit where we were. If you remember, Zephyrus, Pontius, and Yeshua are sitting together in the palace, just talking. Everything that exists is part of God, Yeshua continued, no matter what it may look like to us. Every part of the whole must reflect some quality of God, because there is nothing else to reflect. Yeshua admired the way Pontius and Zephyrus readily absorbed these concepts. We cannot assume that every part reflects every quality of the infinite. Living in this world, we could reject such an assumption out of hand, and it wouldn't require a lot of God's intelligence to figure it out. Yeshua delighted in their soft, knowing chuckles. It follows that everything is God, manifested in different ways. Everything is God, manifested to various degrees. Zephyrus gasped and jolted into an upright sitting position on his couch. Wait! That's the key I've been seeking, to varying degrees. Our whole spiritual quest is to access, absorb, and manifest more and more of the qualities of the infinite consciousness. Something can be a part of God, but not yet be fully manifested as such within the context of our world. It's all a matter of degree. He perked up even more energetically. I want to tie this into ethics. Pontius rearranged his cushions, easing himself into a position so he could focus on Zephyrus. Oh, please do. You're on to something. Your light is getting brighter. Ethics and illusion, Zephyrus mused. We've observed that those who are truly spiritual, and not merely religious, manifest a much higher degree of ethical behavior. I want to refer back to the idea that all parts reflect qualities of the whole. But I'd like to differentiate between what is actually reflected and what we perceive. It doesn't follow that the two would always be the same. That would constitute a thoroughly unsubstantiated assumption, Yeshua acknowledged. Zephyrus organized his thoughts. First, especially in a world like ours, the parts would all perceive themselves and each other differently. And those different perceptions would give rise to what we can call illusion. Our senses are not only limited, but they can be fooled. We can perceive something that isn't really there. Believing we can always see exactly what's being reflected from the infinite, well, that's the rashest assumption of all. Zephyrus looked from Yeshua to Pontius. They were both clearly following him and eagerly anticipating his next step. Much of what we perceive is illusion. Consider the possibility that evil is only an illusion of this world. And that brings me to my second thought. If we have consciousness, then consciousness must be a quality of the infinite. After all, it's easy for us to accept consciousness as a divine quality. However, some people might think that evil exists, so God must be evil. But, big word, but, this might be another rash assumption. We might perceive things, such as evil, that aren't really there. Perhaps evil doesn't qualify as a divine quality. In light of what you're saying, Yeshi, I would describe evil as a lack, or even an absence of divine quality. Pontius glanced at Yeshua. Can you see why I like hanging out with Zephyrus? Easily, Yeshua replied. What you're saying, Zeph, is that you can accept consciousness as a universal essence, but not so with evil. You perceive that evil is no more than wretched choices, made from a lack of consciousness. Exactly, Zephyrus exclaimed. Consciousness is reality, and evil is illusion. Let's compare it to light and dark in the physical world. You can carry a lighted lamp into a dark room, and the darkness simply isn't there anymore. But you can't carry some sort of dark lamp into a sunlit room and make the light disappear. Light is the reality. Darkness is the illusion. The darkness of illusion will always give way in the light of truth, intoned Yeshua in his magical teaching voice. Likewise, when the consciousness of God enters anyone, their evil dissolves. Is it any wonder the spiritual masters have always associated God with light and evil with darkness? In his enthusiasm, Zephyrus swept himself up into a kneeling position on the couch. I like the way you worded it, that evil is nothing but wretched choices based on a lack of consciousness. And tying this together with what you said about the various parts reflecting different qualities of the whole, or disparate parts manifesting a variety of lack, it would be another rash assumption to claim that evil exists in our worlds simply because it's manifested in ours. That would be like sitting in a dark room and claiming that all rooms everywhere must always be dark. How absurd! Evil is far from universal. Have you ever seen a tree commit an act of evil? Does the sand on the beach emanate the kind of horrid energy we feel in Caiaphas? No. Evil is a tiny part of our reality, although a rather intrusive one. Zephyrus rubbed his forehead briefly and sank back onto the cushions, with confusion washing over his features. Where was I going with all that? You weren't. You were finished, Yeshua joked. It's my turn now. Zephyrus appeared momentarily dumbfounded. The exchange between Zephyrus and Yeshua struck Pontius as hysterically funny. He tried rolling over to situate himself to face Yeshua again, but spasms of laughter interfered with his coordination. Several times he started moving, only to collapse on the couch again. It had been too long since he had completely let go like this. As often happens, his hilarity became contagious, and soon all three men were lost in a bout of the giggles. Not one could so much as make eye contact with another, without both slipping into silliness all over again, with the third joining them. After several minutes, the energy gradually lessened, leaving them with aching sides and a pleasant feeling of openness. "Well, well, well," Pontius sighed. "That was refreshing." He peered quizzically at Yeshua. "You were going to say something?" Yeshua eased back onto the cushions and shrugged. "Maybe." His amusing delivery triggered a last chuckle all around. "Since you're this open, why don't I share a meditation technique I learned when I lived in India?" For the next hour, Yeshua guided them into realms of spiritual experience they had never imagined. He nurtured them with a delicate care, as though they were spiritual infants. Afterward, they would describe this session as initiatory. Pontius absorbed it rapidly, but Yeshua noted something about Zephyrus. 0% resistance. Finally, sensing the time was right, Yeshua spoke softly. "You can drift back into the room now, but as you return, see how much of this energy you can bring back with you." He smiled deeply at them as they showed slight physical stirrings. "You're right, Zephyrus. Our spiritual quest involves accessing the essence of the infinitude and integrating it into our lives on Earth. You've both accomplished a fair amount of that right here." Pontius opened his eyes, albeit somewhat tentatively. "Now, if only we can maintain this energy in the midst of everyday life." "That's why we do our spiritual practice," Yeshua told them. "The world is designed to push and pull us away from our center. So we periodically need to realign ourselves with the infinite." Zephyrus opened one eye halfway. He did not feel capable of speech yet, but somehow the words drifted out of him into the room. "That's right. Plato said the universe is a trap for the soul." Yeshua nodded. "And this is part of how we extricate ourselves from the trap. And yet, the trap is ultimately nothing but our own illusions, which directly stems from our own lack," Zephyrus murmured. "Our own lack of genuine consciousness." He experienced the odd sensation that the words were floating out of his mouth, and he exercised no control over them. He could feel his head rotating slightly, bringing Pontius into view. "This is what we've been lacking, Pontius. Divine essence. Our own divine essence. We've searched all over the known world, and it was always right here inside us." Yeshua chuckled amiably. "For being such fearsome Romans, you two are really endearing. And now, to help integrate the energy into your lives, I'd like to show you a few exercises I learned from the spiritual masters of the Far East. Some effective forms of stretching and of flowing your energy. Doing your spiritual practice is essential, yes, but getting grounded afterward is essential as well." He stood up and placed his hands on his hips, obviously feeling quite jocular. "We'll do a few of these techniques first, and then do an extremely basic grounding exercise, the most basic of all. You do have some food in this place, don't you?" Pontius led the way onto the balcony. "I find this to be a comfortable place to watch the sunset. Pick a seat that suits you." As the three men settled into plush chairs, Pontius warmly smiled at Yeshua and asked, "So, your teaching is that the kingdom of God is within us?" Considering everything else we've discussed, it seems there wouldn't be anywhere else it could be, except everywhere else. Now, if you could only succeed in convincing your countrymen of this, it would ease the political tensions and make my job a lot easier. Yeshua sighed. Yes, if only. Yeshua smiled as he noticed Hotep slipping silently into a chair at a respectful distance. I would hate to have to put down another violent rebellion, Pontius continued. My predecessors have had their hands full with this fractious little province. In Rome, your people are generally regarded as collectively insane. And speaking of which, we can thank my immediate predecessor, Valerius Gratus, for playing into the insanity by appointing Joseph Caiaphas as the high priest. Governor Gratus lacked your gift of vision, Yeshua told him. He tried other priests in the position, but they proved pathetically incompetent. I know, Pontius sighed. Valerius was merely looking for a capable administrator. He also didn't have someone like Zephyrus around, who could read into human character. I can look at Caiaphas and see his evil, his black heart. Zephyrus can stand in his presence and feel his evil and interpret it. And by the time we arrived in Judea, added Zephyrus, Caiaphas had inexorably entrenched himself in power, to the point that Pontius couldn't replace him without risking assassination or inciting a rebellion. Of those two possibilities, assassination would be much more likely, since the priesthood depends on Rome for its political power. But maybe Caiaphas lives by the maxim of rule or ruin. Yeshua asked, what was this outrageous event involving idols and iconic standards when you first arrived here at the beginning of the year? I've heard so many variations on the story, and new storylines are being concocted all the time. But all those tales have two things in common. They're viciously anti-Roman, and your personal viewpoint is never considered. Why am I not surprised? Zephyrus muttered. Pontius rolled his eyes. That was so ridiculous. We sailed into port at Caesarea, and Claudia threw herself into decorating our living quarters, as well as learning the customs of your people. She's absolutely fascinated by the culture here. As a result, beautifying our new home became my primary focus. Also, as is typical with a change in provincial administration, personnel started getting shuffled around. I sent a detachment of our fresh mercenary recruits here to Jerusalem to begin relieving the garrison. Meanwhile, we were busy in Caesarea, Zephyrus added. After all, Caesarea is actually our headquarters. We were pretty much overwhelmed, and yes, Claudia was keeping Pontius more than busy. Not that he's henpecked, mind you. He winked at Pontius. You see, Pontius married up in Roman society, a daughter of the senatorial class. We were both born into the equestrian class, which forms the second tier. So, having a wife of senatorial upbringing, he has to put up with a slightly domineering attitude. And she got a little fussy about setting up our living quarters, Pontius added. My time and attention were consumed in domesticity, and I never anticipated any trouble. Ah, I'm beginning to see, said Yeshua. The troops who came to Jerusalem were green recruits, fresh off the ship. They were a little too eager to set themselves up in their new home, without a sufficient understanding of the quirks of our people." "Quirks," Pontius echoed. "Quirks indeed. Well, our young soldiers had some quirks of their own. Even though they arrived in Jerusalem at nightfall, they were so eager they didn't even think to get some sleep at the end of their 3-day march. Instead, they threw themselves into decorating Jerusalem, with the same kind of enthusiasm Claudius showed for our personal quarters in Caesarea." "At night time?" asked Yeshua. "That was largely our fault, though," admitted Zephyrus. "Neither Pontius nor I had even thought to caution them." "But who would think to caution anyone about something like this?" Pontius asked somewhat incredulously. Yeshua started shaking with quiet laughter. "And so your men decided to decorate Herod's palace in the middle of the night. What sorts of things did they put up there that got the people so riled up?" "Mostly Roman shields," Pontius replied. "But the shields bore some insignia that the Hebrews found offensive." "I'm not sure which was worse," interjected Zephyrus, "the shields or the little statues of Tiberius." Pontius and Zephyrus allowed themselves to get caught up in Yeshua's merriment. For the next minute, the three of them sat there chuckling and shaking their heads. Yeshua threw his hands into the air and exclaimed, "I can just imagine these people waking up in the morning and finding Roman symbols all over Herod's palace." His body convulsed with spasms of mirth as he envisioned the reactions of the Judean people. The Hebrews don't allow effigies of any kind. This harkens back to the tales of Moses and the golden calf, and Yahweh's condemnation of idolatry. Of course, when the people of Jerusalem woke up to find themselves subjected to Roman idolatry, they completely overreacted. Yeshua grinned at Zephyrus. "I would say it was those little statues of Tiberius that pushed the people over the edge." Zephyrus doubled over. "Oh, God, that's hysterical." He sat up, radiantly amused, and emitted a strange sort of giggling sigh. "You know, Pontius, I wonder exactly what percentage of the population of Jerusalem dropped everything and marched off toward Caesarea to voice their protest." "And meanwhile," Yeshua prodded, "you two had no idea what was going on?" "None," Pontius replied. "One morning, irate Judeans began trickling into our headquarters in Caesarea. I didn't admit them to the building because they appeared for all the world to be nothing more than some of the infamous religious fanatics of Judea. I let them stay in the courtyard, where they could indulge in their rantings and raving about blasphemy and desecration and sacrilege and violation and whatever else. But more and more of them trickled in as the morning wore on," said Zephyrus. "Every so often, one of us would step onto the balcony and try to reason with them, but the mob mentality rendered all our efforts useless. And the next thing you know, they weren't trickling in anymore. They were pouring in. They kept shouting to us not to provoke them into a revolt. At one point, I held up my hands in a sign of peace and said, 'We're not provoking you.' And they went berserk. They didn't want to talk to me. Anyway, they wanted to talk to Pilate. Then they didn't want to talk to Pilate. They wanted to talk to Caesar." "And that's when you called out the guard?" asked Yeshua. Pontius rolled his eyes again. "It was my headquarters. I was faced with a burgeoning mob situation in my courtyard. All I did was station a guard around the perimeter of the palace proper. I ordered our men to maintain their calm and professional demeanor. Nobody so much as drew a sword." Zephyrus threw himself back in his chair with a loud barking laugh. Looking back, those Judeans were hysterically funny. Well, they were certainly hysterical. When they saw the guard form up around them, they started baring their necks and telling us to go ahead and kill them, because they weren't going to violate God's law. And we still had no idea what they were talking about. Yeshua put on an air of naivete. Our people can sometimes get a little dramatic, don't you think? A little, yes, Pontius acknowledged with mock seriousness, and then heaved a sigh of relief. But fortunately, that's when those young Herods arrived. For as much as their grandfather was hated by your people for usurping power in Judea and selling himself out as a vassal to the empire, these young men seemed to command a significant amount of respect. Of course, I admitted them without hesitation. Zephyrus leaned back in his chair and sighed. You know, it's astonishing what can be accomplished when you can talk to people who are capable of reason. Even though one of them was an arrogant young devil who hated Pontius right from the start, we finally learned what the problem was, and we immediately resolved it. Yes, Pontius agreed. Right then and there, I wrote an order and rushed it off to Jerusalem to have the offending effigies and insignia removed. And I began asking the Herods more specific questions, making it clear I was taking notes to include in my report to Tiberius. And then came the grand announcement, Zephyrus added. 2 of the Herods walked out onto the balcony, and one of them signaled for silence, and actually got it, which was more than we ourselves could hope to accomplish. And the older Herod shouted, "The issue has been resolved to our satisfaction. The effigies have been ordered removed." I think it helped that we stayed inside and let the Herods create the impression they were in a position of authority and had the situation under control. The crowd cheered for a few minutes and then started leaving the courtyard. Their exodus resembled a triumphal march. You would think that they had just conquered the whole Roman Empire. They headed back to Jerusalem, well behind our messenger, I might add, Pontius emphasized. By the time those people got back here to Jerusalem, everything had returned to normal, if you can call any of this normal. Did you ever get a response from the emperor? Asked Yeshua. Eventually, yes, Pontius replied. Simple and straight to the point. I submitted a lengthy, detailed report, and in the proud tradition of his great-uncle Julius, Tiberius responded with 3 words: live and learn. In the mind of Tiberius, Judea doesn't merit any more of his time and attention than that. Yeshua leaned forward, not yet satisfied. Can I get some clarity on the conduct of your soldiers during this event? Pontius shrugged, as though there were nothing more to add. Well, sure. Ask anything you want. Gazing into Pontius, Yeshua more than merely doubted the information he had received previous to this discussion. Some of the people claim you ordered the soldiers to surround them. That's almost true, Pontius acknowledged. I ordered my men to stand the perimeter of the interior of the courtyard. And that was my elite palace guard. They were all seasoned professionals, and I'm sure they appeared quite intimidating. But that was my intent, especially with Longinus in command. The guard could be trusted not to act rashly, and their presence would discourage the Judeans from doing anything rash as well. I merely drew a boundary line, Perhaps the people didn't bother looking behind themselves. I left the entrance wide open as an exit. I was hoping they would simply get up and leave. Some of them claim you ordered an attack, Yeshua added, already knowing better, but wanting to hear a direct explanation that he could relay to others. Zephyrus bellowed forth with a raucous guffaw, then spoke with comedic sarcasm. Oh, yes, there's one for the annals of Roman military history. Veteran legionnaires launch an attack on a virtually unarmed mass of citizens crowded into a courtyard with a death toll of 0. Somehow, those facts don't add up. Did you even get a report of a bloody nose? No, but stories like this have a curious habit. They grow in the telling, especially in Judea. Yeshua sighed and leaned back. Thank you. I will recount your story to those who will listen. Zephyrus raised his eyebrows. All 3 of them, eh? Chapter 5. You are deeply envied. The sun had been set for more than an hour by the time they reached the Magdalene residence. Zephyrus and Josiah had gladly volunteered to accompany Yeshua on what Zephyrus referred to as a moonwalk, to make sure Yeshua reached home safely. The nearly full moon created an atmosphere of extended twilight, and all 3 men expressed their delight with the mystical effects. Josiah expressed all the more exuberance because there was the waxing Passover moon. Zephyrus took note that Yeshua maintained his balanced state of being without getting swept up in holiday excitement. Bathed in the moonlight, with lamplight in the windows, the house bade them welcome. Yeshua led the way through the front door, and Mary seemed to float across the floor into his arms. How did it go? Yeshua wrapped her up in an enthusiastic bear hug. It was terrific, and we've been invited to visit with Pontius and his wife next month in Caesarea. We? Yes, you and I. And meanwhile, I've already got a growing audience at the Praetorium here in Jerusalem. In fact, you can come tomorrow afternoon. Pontius is inviting Joseph of Arimathea. You're already calling him Pontius? Mary kissed Yeshua on the lips, and then swung her head around with a delightful grace. Speaking of calling him Pontius, hello, Zeph. She drew herself away from Yeshua to give Zephyrus a quick hug and a kiss on the cheek. Mary suddenly froze when she caught her initial glimpse of Josiah, who had been standing at the doorway in Yeshua's shadow. Seeing a Roman in her house had been a novelty when Zephyrus had paid his first visit, but here she was faced with a Roman in a centurion's uniform. Zephyrus interceded swiftly. Mary, this is Josiah. Mary's eyes widened as her smile returned. Josiah, we've heard so much about you. With only a slight hesitation, she placed her hands on his upper arms and kissed him on the cheek. Welcome. What's this about Josiah? Asked Martha, as she slipped through the archway into the room. She, too, showed the impact of encountering a uniformed centurion in her own home. Zephyrus availed himself of the opportunity. Yes, Martha, this is Josiah. Josiah, this is Martha Magdalene, matriarch of the household. As he had hoped, his comment sparked a reaction of amusement all around. His vision blurred, and the room seemed to swim as he focused on Martha's smile. He could feel the sound of her laughter in his heart. Martha greeted Roshaya much the same way Mary had done, and then turned to Zephyrus. "Good to see you again, Zeph." However brief, she engulfed him in a real hug, one he could not even return. She kissed him on the cheek. Fully enlivened and staying on top of his opportunities, Zephyrus even managed to sneak in a peck on her cheek before she withdrew from him and threw herself into a warm embrace with Yeshua. Zephyrus thought, "Those two look so at home together." Oh, how Zephyrus longed for an embrace like that. He watched Martha sink into Yeshua. Their affection felt purely familial. It lacked the sensuality that filled the room when Yeshua and Mary embraced, but the room still received the radiation of love. Even though Yeshua and Martha were virtually the same age, the energy of their relationship translated as father and daughter. A realization dawned on Zephyrus. That's right. The Magdalens were barely in their teens when both their parents died. She hasn't had a father's affection in all these years. "Anything to eat or drink?" asked Mary. Yeshua groaned. "Oh, no thanks. We loaded up at the palace. Our carts are full. I couldn't carry any more right now." Martha pulled back from Yeshua and looked up at him, her hands resting on his chest. She feigned repulsion. "Yeshi, you're not eating Roman food now, are you?" "No," replied Yeshua. "Pontius is a more gracious host than that." Martha pushed away from him and placed her hands on her hips. "So, we're calling him Pontius now, are we?" Yeshua grinned at her and mimicked her pose. "As a matter of fact, yes. And if you're nice," he teased, "we'll even let you join us at the palace tomorrow afternoon, and you can see for yourself." He chortled at her look of surprise and eased his posture. "Now, I can't guarantee that your own relationship with him will be on such a friendly, casual basis by the end of the evening, but you'll see that mine is." "That's right, Martha." Mary snuggled up to her sister from behind and kissed her on the neck. Martha leaned back into the embrace, and Mary spoke to her softly. "Yeshi says we're invited to the palace to meet Governor Pilate. Correction, I mean, we're invited to the palace to meet Pontius. And Joseph of Arimathea as well." Martha reached back with her left hand to run her fingers through her sister's hair. Martha raised her eyebrows and smiled at Yeshua. "We are?" "Well, yes." But Yeshua's answer seemed rather tentative. "You and Mary, yes. Lazarus, no." Martha gaped awkwardly for a moment. "The governor knows about Lazarus?" Yeshua smiled sadly. "No, I know about Lazarus." He glanced around the room. "And where is he now?" "He's asleep," Martha replied delicately. Zephyrus knew that in this case, asleep meant passed out from too much wine. Mary turned around to face Roshaya and Zephyrus. "Could you two sit down and chat for a bit before you leave?" They both readily accepted the invitation, so everyone made themselves comfortable on the couches and padded chairs. "Am I hearing this correctly?" asked Martha, still trying to diminish her last twinge of disbelief. "You're saying that we're going to the governor's palace tomorrow afternoon, and we're not only going to meet Governor Pilate, but we're going to meet Joseph of Arimathea?" She seemed to be throwing the question out into the open, so Zephyrus took advantage of the opening. "Yes, Joseph was the first Judean to greet us on the docks by Caesarea, when we first landed. We all enjoyed each other's company right from the beginning, and he's been a regular guest at both palaces ever since." Martha tilted her head and narrowed her eyes. "You mean he just happened to be out on the docks when your ship came in?" "Not exactly," Zephyrus answered. "He maintains an impressive intelligence network, and since he often knows what ships are where, it was no surprise that he showed up on the docks less than an hour before we arrived." Mary drew herself into a cross-legged position and adjusted the folds of her robe to hang over the edge of the dark brown, padded chair. Every move she made, no matter how slight, emanated a sensuousness that felt palpable in the room. I would imagine he was all ready to conduct business with the new administration, before you even had a chance to start unpacking. Roshaya chuckled and nodded. "Yes, indeed. That's Joseph. As he says, he likes to stay a step or two ahead of the game. I've known him casually for a few years, but now that he and Governor Pilate are close friends, I've gotten much better acquainted with him." "Governor Pilate?" asked Mary. "You don't call him Pontius?" Zephyrus made a show of stifling mock derision. "Well," making no effort to hide his discomfort, Josiah squirmed, "You see, I have trouble with that. He wants me to drop all formalities in private, but considering his position—" Roshaya playfully squirmed at Zephyrus. "Oh, it's easy for you, Zeph. You were his best friend long before he became a governor. And it's easy for Joseph because he's not only the wealthiest man in Judea, but a prominent member of the Sanhedrin Council." His features almost melting with warmth, Roshaya smiled at Yeshua. "And it's easy for Yeshua because he's Yeshua." With the moon noticeably higher, Zephyrus and Roshaya gained admittance to the courtyard, exchanged greetings with the guards, and sauntered toward the palace doors. In the chilly air of late evening, the gardens were especially fragrant. Roshaya stopped to sniff some flowers. The cry of a sentry high on the walls drew their attention upward. "It's funny," Roshaya mused. "The same flowers, the same smells, but such different sounds after dark. Instead of 1,000 songbirds, only the occasional night bird in the midst of all the frogs and crickets." "Yes, and you can hear the fountains more clearly," Zephyrus added. "At night, this place creates the strangest image in my mind's eye. See if you can follow this. Since the fortress is twice as long as it is wide, I can see it as 2 pairs of cupped hands opposite each other, meeting at the fingertips. The towers are the 4 thumbs jutting into the air. The hands are holding this little piece of paradise, as though offering it to the heavens." Memory of his first private talk with Yeshua under the stars filled his mind. Zephyrus was still processing the insights, and he sighed with longing for Yeshua's knowledge of the celestial realms. There's no way to share this with anyone yet. "The skies are filled with mysteries," murmured Roshaya, as they resumed their casual pace toward the palace doors. Zephyrus asked, "What happened the very moment you first met Yeshua? You know, when you both initially shared eye contact, Pontius and I both had profound experiences." Roshaya made some sounds of experiencing ecstasy. "I didn't know anyone could feel so many emotions at the same time. I wanted to laugh in delight, cry for joy, jump up and down, weep in grief, kneel in reverence, embrace him as a friend, throw myself at his mercy." "I understand," Zephyrus assured him. And somehow all those feelings coalesced into a soft warmth, and I felt like an infant in the arms of a loving mother. Roshaya cast a dreamy gaze at the moon, then glanced at Zephyrus. "Do you think he might be the Messiah?" Zephyrus caught himself beginning to roll his eyes, but opted for a more understanding response. "I was raised as a pagan, Rosh, with some druidic influence on the side, and I've grown into a sort of spiritual pragmatist. I'm a bit skeptical concerning the Messiah stories fabricated by so-called prophets, who could allegedly predict an event centuries in advance. I know people are starting to spread the rumor about Yeshua, but these are people who have been raised in a fever of messianic anticipation. Every time someone of consequence emerges in their midst, they wonder if it's their long-promised Messiah. You grew up Hebrew. You explain what a Messiah is supposed to be. Yours will be only one of thousands of interpretations." Roshaya chuckled as he pushed one of the huge double doors open. "Yes, I know you're right, but it's fun to dream and play with interpretations. And yet, at the same time, even the mighty Zephyrus can't deny there's something about Yeshua that defies rational explanation." "Rationality, as we've known it," Zephyrus acknowledged. "But rational or not, there's an explanation, and that's what I want to find." "Seek and you shall find," the voice of Pontius intoned from the shadows at the other end of the atrium. "As you can tell, I've been absorbing Yeshua's teachings." Emerging between two pillars into soft lamplight, Pontius held out his hands in a sign of welcome. "I feel like an old mother hen. For whatever reason, I wanted to make sure Yeshua reached home safely." Zephyrus chuckled as they approached each other. "It's funny. You worry about Yeshua, but you take it for granted Roshaya and I will be perfectly safe out there on the dark streets of Jerusalem." "You're both veterans of war," Pontius declared, "and Caiaphas finds you of no particular note. Now, you two stop right here in the lamplight and let me take a good look at you." He softened his gaze, carefully scanning both of their energy fields. "You've had quite a day, Roshaya. Meeting Yeshua has opened some possibilities for you that may pleasantly surprise you." "It feels that way, sir," Roshaya agreed. He wanted to ask Pontius if he thought Yeshua might be the Messiah, but decided it would be a useless question. "Anything else, Governor?" "No, everything feels complete for one day. You know your assignment for tomorrow, except for one detail. You'll be expected to join us when we entertain Joseph, Yeshua, and Mary." "And Martha?" added Roshaya. "That's Mary's older sister. Yeshua also invited her." "Ah, yes, I see," Pontius responded nonchalantly, taking care not to look at Zephyrus. This really isn't the time to tease him about his feelings for Martha. "Well, good night, Roshaya." "Thank you, Governor. Good night, Zeph." This was a thoroughly enjoyable evening. Turning smartly, Roshaya marched off towards his quarters. "My, how our lives can change," Pontius quietly mused as Roshaya's footsteps faded. "Several days ago, I witnessed you in a state I had never imagined, after you first encountered Yeshua. And a few days later I witnessed you in a state I've always enjoyed imagining, after you first encountered Martha. And now tonight, after seeing her again, you seem distant and lonesome. You're not the first man this has ever happened to, you know. But you can tell me about it tomorrow." "Good. I don't know what to say right now anyway," Zephyrus glumly muttered. and don't pretend you're not enjoying this." "I'm absolutely loving it," Pontius replied. "And now, I'm going to enact a role reversal with you. Instead of you advising me, I'm going to advise you. I've thrown you off your rhythm these last several days. You're accustomed to taking your exercises in the afternoon and then bathing, but I've altered your schedule at a trying time. We can set Yeshua aside as an exciting anomaly for now, but not Martha. I know all the symptoms, Zeph. And since I won't meet Martha until tomorrow, I can't help you with an assessment this evening. But you still have some advice?" "Yes, I do. And it's truly sound advice from a married man." He patted Zephyrus on the shoulder. "Zeph, this is an area of life where people can make dreadful mistakes by acting rashly. I'm advising you to regain your balance, and the best way you can regain your balance is to go recruit a couple of your favorite serving girls and head for the baths, right now." Zephyrus merely stared at Pontius without any visible reaction. "If only you could see yourself, Zeph. No response to the thought of playing with your girlfriends in the baths?" Reaching out to place his hands on either side of Zephyrus's face, Pontius intensified the earnest energy in his voice. "Come back, Zeph. You're lost in there. I want my friend back." Pontius moved forward and gently embraced him. "Reclaim your freedom while you still have it. Just be yourself." Zephyrus let him slump in a sigh of surrender and returned the embrace. "You're right, I know it. But something inside of me is, well, I don't know what it is or what it's doing. Again, do you think you're the first man who ever felt this?" Zephyrus allowed Pontius to maintain the embrace and to rock them gently back and forth. Zephyrus thought of answering, "Maybe," in a comical voice, but simply admitted, "No, and I know I can trust what you're telling me." "Then follow my advice, and you'll regain your clarity." With slow, deliberate firmness, Pontius moved aside and pushed Zephyrus in the direction of the servants' quarters. As Pontius walked away, he softly called out, "Have fun, Zeph. I already told Gordian to fill in for you at morning salutations. You can stay up late and then sleep in if you want. I'll see you sometime tomorrow. Meanwhile, I'm going to enjoy some time with Mistress number 17. Zephyrus entered the dim hallway leading toward the rooms housing the unmarried female slaves. Behind him he heard the tread of sandals and Hotep's quiet voice. "Zeph?" Zephyrus slowed down and allowed Hotep to come abreast of him. "Were you listening to our conversation in the atrium?" "Yes, and I can help you," Hotep assured him. "After dark, it's easy to hide in the shadows and keep track of what's happening. So now I can follow the governor's lead and give you some advice." Zephyrus became tittering as they walked along the hallway. In light of his current circumstances, he suddenly felt relieved that he had invited Hotep to engage in a completely informal relationship in private. "All right, Hotep, what's your advice?" "First, I would advise that you stop at this next hallway, hear me out, and then take the other hallway direction to the baths. I'll go recruit your girlfriend for you." "You will?" Zephyrus asked with unconcealed amusement. "And only one? Don't I get to exercise any choice in the matter?" "You'll be grateful, Zeph," Hotep insisted as they halted at the intersection of the two hallways. "There's a young serving girl who has just come of age. She's attracting a lot of attention, but has rebuffed every man who has approached her, me included. That's because her biggest dream in life is for you to be her first lover. She's been raving about you for months, for longer than I've been here. And now that she's of age, this presents a perfect opportunity for both of you. I can say this with confidence, because I know both of you and your situations quite well. You seem to know a lot, Hotep. Precisely. And I also know it would be more graceful if I went to her and explained what I've arranged. It would ease the shock for her and allow her enough time to prepare for experiencing the reality of her dream coming true, right now, this evening. And Zephyrus, maybe you could appreciate how much more effective this would be if I told her that you just now found out she's come of age, and so you requested her specifically. Zephyrus peered into Hotep's gleaming eyes and fully empathed his sincerity. All right, I'm going to trust you on this, Hotep. Well, yeah, But forgive me if I do so with a bit of reservation. There's one little detail you somehow left out. So tell me, who is she? Eumelia, the one from Parthia. Yes, I know her. She's of age now? Precisely. And you are the man she wants. You seem to have no idea that you are deeply envied by so many men, for a multitude of reasons. Eumelia is now providing one more reason. Breathing deeply and remembering his interactions with Eumelia, Zephyrus allowed himself to smile. He could feel the old Zephyrus begin to stir. And you're right, Hotep. There's always been that light in her eyes. But are you telling me that I'm the only man who receives those looks from her? Precisely. She's incredibly adept at erecting invisible barriers between herself and all other men but you. But there's more to the situation. The only people who realize she's of age are the slaves, and that applies to every man she's rejected. She has begged us all not to tell any of the Romans, because she's not in a position to say no to a Roman official. But she's living in terror that one of the spurned male servants might secretly let it slip. Secretly? Hotep nodded meaningfully. Such a man would have to do it secretly, because the rest of us would make his life miserable if we knew. I don't think it would happen, because everybody cares so much about Eumelia. Zephyrus took a moment to ponder the way Eumelia treated him, the light in her eyes, the music in her voice, the emanations of her physical and emotional energies. Eumelia doesn't merely admire you, Zeph, Hotep continued. She loves you. Any time you're around, she comes alive. The rest of us can see her dreams written all over her face. Trust me. She'll help you regain your senses. Are you insinuating that I've lost my senses? Precisely. You haven't even made a comment about how attractive Eumelia is. Well, you're right again, Zephyrus acknowledged. Come to think of it, she's adorable. And she adores you, declared Hotep. Now, help me help you. Ask. Ask what? Hotep grinned and shook his head. He laid a gentle but firm hand on Zephyrus's shoulder and poured his compassion into their eye contact. This is one more indication you've lost your senses. Ask me to bring Eumelia to you. She can always tell if people are lying to her. I need to speak in complete honesty with her. We've just found out Eumelia has come of age. Now, specifically request that I bring Eumelia to you in the baths. Then I will be able to tell her truthfully that you requested her." It took Zephyrus another moment to process the information. He sighed and then smiled into Hotep's eyes. "All right, Hotep. Bring Amelia to me in the baths." "You'll be using the governor's private bath?" "Yes. Bring her to me there." "Good, because I already have everything ready for you, including your favorite oils for special occasions." Zephyrus blinked in confusion. "When did you have time to do that? You just now followed me down the hallway from the atrium." "So I did," acknowledged Hotep. "However, about an hour earlier I overheard Governor Pilate mention to Gordian that he was going to give you this advice, so I took it upon myself to prepare the room for the two of you. I've been giddy with anticipation ever since. I really like Amelia, Zeph, and you." Zephyrus graced Hotep with a mischievous grin. "All right, Hotep. I'm willing if she's willing. I'm ready to regain my senses." "She'll help you regain senses you never knew you had." Duplicating what Pontius had done, Hotep physically angled Zephyrus and slowly pushed him down the hallway toward the baths. As Hotep started to turn back toward the other hallway, he gave Zephyrus a firm pat on the shoulder. "Get ready, Zeph. She's on her way." Life had seemed so simple, but within a matter of days it had grown complex. Zephyrus surrendered to the heat of the bathwater and stared at the marble wall. His mind had no interest in following a straight, linear course like the wall. No, his mind would rather float around in the 10-foot diameter circular bath and explore its varying depths. He let the images flow. Yeshua, Martha, stars, suns and planets. He closed his eyes and leaned back against the edge of the bath, sinking into the water up to his chin. Past lives, Yeshua, lives in other worlds, a man from the stars. Drifting in nebulous reverie, Zephyrus heard the sound of a door opening and closing. He sensed it as though from another world. Oh, that Roman world out there. He vaguely remembered it. He slowly turned his head and opened his eyes, only to meet another pair of eyes that might have been Yeshua's and Martha's combined. A wave of recognition swept over him. Yes, he recognized the physical form of Amelia, but for the first time with Amelia, he became aware of a subtle connection with a kindred soul, an ancient friend. Have I been blocking this? His instinctual self began awakening, and his lust for life stirred from deep within. His body gently slithered in the water, sitting up to face Amelia. He had evidently never fully appreciated her olive-skinned beauty. Shimmering black hair, thick and lustrous, cascaded over the shoulders of a petite, womanly physique. His breathing grew fuller as he let his focus float down her grayish-white tunic, which ended at her knees. His tongue spontaneously prepared his lips for their favorite natural activities. He noted the smooth yet strong lower legs, the bare feet. His eyes wended their way back up her body, caressing every inch, and he wondered what she would look like without her tunic. He watched her chest rise and fall with fullness of breath and breast. His nostrils flared of their own accord, and he could feel the rhythm of his breathing synchronize with hers. Such a lovely neck. He kissed it softly in his imagination. By the time his gaze returned to Eumilia's, her dark brown eyes were brimming with tears. Through those windows, another soul reached out to him from the mists of time. Zephyrus opened his empathy, at first carefully questioning, but soon joyously welcoming, as he penetrated her feelings. His eyes widened in surprise at the depth and purity of her love. His reality wafted to a sweet halt. Eumelia swallowed and drew a breath to speak through a smile that was not quite sure of itself. "Hotep said you requested me." The sound of her voice touched him tentatively, uncertain as to whether it made a statement or asked a question. But the resonance within her voice hinted at a hidden strength beneath her delicate expression. Below the surface of the water, muscles contracted and relaxed, undulating with gradually rising waves of anticipation. Zephyrus nodded. "Yes, that's true. Hotep told me you're now of age, and I was the only Roman you wanted to know. So I asked him to bring you down here, if you're willing." "More than willing, Zephyrus," she responded, as her brown eyes widened. "Desirous. I don't think I could bear the thought of any other man taking me. Ever since your first visit to this palace, I've wondered, and I've hoped. And now, when you showed up 3 weeks early for the Passover holidays—" Her chest heaved, and she smiled in acceptance of what was happening. "And I would be coming of age while you were still here." "Exactly when did you come of age?" "Today." "You make me wonder, Eumelia. Is there really such a thing as coincidence?" She giggled, and her body gracefully danced a shrug. "Maybe not." An unfamiliar but delectable sensation welled up within Zephyrus. He allowed it to fill his entire being, a nebulous energy that wanted him to breathe it outward from the center of his heart, a mysterious energy that wanted its own voice in his inner dialogue. "Slow down, Zeph. This is not the Olympics." Soaking the heat of the water into his body, and soaking the sight of Eumelia into his consciousness, he noted the conspicuous absence of desire for a typical romp in the bath. "You have eternity tonight." Nothing in him wanted to ride Eumelia like a horse. Something within him cared. Not that he had never cared for his girlfriends, but this emerging energy expanded his concept of caring. Zephyrus felt he had come here for Eumelia, every bit as much as Eumelia had come here for Zephyrus. Open, Zeph. Open all the way. A curious twinge of remorse propelled him into the realization that he had always remained guarded with his empathic abilities. This gift had served as a shield, a probe, and a tool for manipulation. He wondered how empathic Yeshua must be, and if Yeshua ever closed that part of himself when interacting with others. Maybe he never closes it with Mary. And now I have a chance to practice it with Eumelia. Trust her, Zeph. Trust your heart. He considered the possibility that it constituted an act of cowardice to withhold this magical part of himself in every situation. Perhaps now he faced his first exception, Perhaps he could muster the courage to open his empathy all the way with Eumelia, and leave it open. His own smile had never felt so serene, and he wondered what it looked like to Eumelia. "I think it would be nice to make this an extremely happy 14th birthday for you." Her entire body quivered as she sighed. "I'm so excited, Zeph, but I'm also nervous." "We'll take our time and go easy then," he voiced softly. "I don't have morning salutations tomorrow, so there's no hurry." Her concern rushed out onto her face before she could stop it. She did not want to put any kind of damper on their tryst, but Zephyrus had glimpsed her apprehension and was already peering quizzically at her. "I'm sorry, Zeph. It's really wonderful you're off duty tomorrow, but I'll have to get up early and—" "No, you won't," he interrupted. "Not if you're with me." Her mind whirled like a potter's wheel as it wrapped itself around his intimation. "You mean if I'm still with you tomorrow?" "When we're finished here, we'll go to my quarters. I want you to spend the night with me. You won't have to report for work until I say so. And who in this palace is going to contradict me?" His memory drifted back to the first time he saw Yeshua talk, to the impression that Yeshua's whole body smiled. "I wonder if this is what that feels like. Why do I think this feels like Yeshua?" "Does that sound like an acceptable birthday treat, Eumelia?" She breathed the word yes, like a stage whisper. Zephyrus wondered if her yes could be heard throughout the universe. He rose out of the bath and stood dripping naked a few feet in front of her. "See, I'm not even erect yet. This shows you we're not in any hurry." He had no idea where his next statement come from. "No man is going to take you. If you choose to give yourself, I will graciously receive." He almost physically reeled as the power of her gratitude and amazement washed through him. Zephyrus caught himself nearly closing off part of his empathy, but realized it's fear. It's a knee-jerk reaction. You can be as brave as Mars in the face of battle, but here you are, you become a coward in the face of the sweetest girl you've ever met. Eumelia shyly lowered her eyes, slightly to one side. Smoothly and sensuously, she removed her tunic and linen, allowing each to drop onto the mosaic floor. She could feel the admiring gaze of Zephyrus, the touch of his awareness exploring her skin. She sensed him energetically fondling her breasts, and their essence firmed until she felt as though her love would burst out through her taut nipples. Her physical and emotional energies created the sensation of contracting and expanding simultaneously, as though 6 times as much life force now tried to occupy the same space. Was there suddenly more of her in existence? Or had this much of her never before awakened? In a stage whisper of his own, Zephyrus voiced what his eyes and heart were telling him. "Eumelia, this is perfection." He consciously resisted shielding his heart, as he realized that Eumelia knew everything he was saying, on every level, even before his own awareness grasped it. Yes, her body is ideal, according to my tastes in women, but the situation and the timing are flawless. These 2 souls, found each other as ordained, and she knows it. Surrendering in the face of a delicious fate, he dissolved whatever was left of his empathetic shield. Allowing his essence to melt into Eumelia's, Zephyrus eased forward. She still kept her gaze averted. Eumelia's gratitude wrung a few tears from her eyes, and she knew that in a moment Zephyrus would gently kiss the traces of those tears. Her desire drew him into a soft embrace. He stood more than a full head taller than she, and Eumelia snuggled the side of her face into his upper chest. He began kissing the top of her head, nuzzling her hair, and soon his lips caressed her cheeks where the tears had flowed. Eumelia quivered, and from her depths erupted the sheerest ecstasy. Finally, she lifted her eyes to meet his, and inevitably their lips met in gentle welcome. Their vision blurred into sweet oblivion as their eyes closed, and they lost themselves in the melding of their lives. Nothing would be held back. Nothing could remain closed. Zephyrus relinquished all pretense to control, and the vast realm of his empathy absorbed him. For the first time since early childhood, he expanded his heart into the magic of opening his true self all the way in union with another. He could feel his own fingertips tenderly exploring the soft skin of Eumelia's back. But he could also feel each touch from within her, as she herself was feeling it. Why had he gotten into the habit of rushing through this universe of sensations? With Emilia, he could float here forever. Their embrace intensified as their tongues found each other, and his heart unfolded like a flower into the astounding awareness that everything within Emilia resonated with his essence. 100% resonance. I never knew this existed. And he understood that Eumelia could feel all of this as acutely as he could, if not more so. One sensation that attracted their mutual attention was that of his growing erection, as it began pressing against her, and its tip found its way between her thighs. Eumelia giggled, and Zephyrus chuckled along. He hugged her tightly and kissed her enthusiastically several times on her cheeks and neck, and he whispered, "Let's continue this discussion in the water." Their hands would not stop caressing each other's bodies as they drew apart, less than an arm's length. Eumelia lowered her eyes again, only this time not to the side, and not at all shyly. Sliding her fingertips delicately from his waist, and then gently stroking his erection with both hands, she looked up into his eyes. With her own eyes, she matched the mischievous spirit she knew existed in Zephyrus. Her sly grin widened into an eager smile. "Does this mean we're in a hurry now?" "Oh, no." He drew out each syllable, his voice dropping to a significantly deeper pitch. "Maybe someday, but not tonight. This is your night, Emilia, and you will set the pace." Chapter 6. The souls recognize each other. The governor's palace bustled, in what Zephyrus referred to as the storm before the calm. The legionaries and servants had been ordered to complete all tasks by noon, and then to secure a quiet and private atmosphere for the governor and his guests. With a centurion's eye, Roshaiah surveyed his men, hustling in and out of the atrium at their tasks, and he found himself smiling at their famous Roman efficiency. He answered questions and gave orders in such a friendly manner that an outside observer would never guess this unassuming young man commanded not only the Jerusalem garrison, but all the Roman legionaries in Judea. Without exception, the soldiers and servants loved and respected him. Roshaiah never found the need to exercise a heavy hand in the execution of his duties, and no one had ever seen him lose his temper. As Roshaiah finished outlining instructions for 3 of his men, his attention was drawn to the sound of one of the massive double front doors opening. Hotep strode through the door, with a countenance far beyond his position as a slave, and this effect was accentuated by the flood of sunlight accompanying his entrance. Roshaiah wondered, how can this young slave exude such a luminary presence? "Roshaiah, sir, the first guest has arrived, but I'm not quite sure this one could be considered a guest, strictly speaking, sir." Hotep swung the door completely open. "According to my observations, this one could be considered more of a family member than a guest." Roshaiah's quizzical expression transformed into a smile as Joseph of Arimathea stepped through the doorway. The 2 men approached each other and embraced, as Hotep smoothly swung the huge door shut with barely a sound. "Actually, sir, isn't it warm enough now to leave the doors and windows open?" "Yes, Hotep," answered Roshaiah, "that would be fine." "Is Pontius in his office?" asked Joseph. "Yes," answered Roshaiah, turning to walk shoulder to shoulder with Joseph. "He and Zephyrus have been locked in a most unpleasant discussion." Joseph appeared simultaneously concerned and confused. "I've never known those 2 not to get along." "Oh, they're fine with each other, Joseph. It's the subject matter itself that's unpleasant. They've been poring over the contents of the letter you brought from their friend Alexius in Rome." Without breaking stride, Roshaiah called back over his shoulder, "Gordian, you're in charge until I return." He and Joseph strode purposefully between 2 marble pillars, past the mosaic stairs, and into the prefect's hallway. "As I understand it," began Joseph, "their friend Alexius has been taking a survey of the capital. I would imagine his preliminary report is causing a bit of consternation. From what I've heard about Alexius, he's not the sort of man who minces words, nor transmogrifies information to make things appear more advantageous than they really are. Facts, Roshaiah. There's nothing like a dose of cold, hard facts to ruin an otherwise lovely day. Do you know any of the details?" "Yes," Roshaiah sighed. "Basically, Zephyrus and Governor Pilate are both disgusted by the moral decay growing rampant in the heart of the empire." "That I can understand," muttered Joseph. "I can leave it to them to give you a detailed account," said Roshaiah, coming to a halt outside the governor's office. He rhythmically knocked on the office door. "I find it all too disheartening." He could hear Pontius bidding his entry. "And to think that my mother actually left Judea to move to Rome. And that was my father's choice." Roshaya pushed the door open and stood back to allow Joseph to enter first. "Joseph, I'm glad you've come early," exclaimed Pontius from behind his desk. "And don't go sneaking back out the door, Roshaya. I want you to join us. You and Joseph can help us solve all the problems of the empire. And we need to get this done by the time Yeshua gets here," added Zephyrus, snuggling back into the blue cushions of his chair and lolling his head about. "Even though it's a totally hopeless cause, and we could never hope to stem the tide of cultural degeneration in our lifetime." Joseph tittered amiably, sinking into his usual chair. "I admire your optimism, Zeph." "It's called realism," stated Zephyrus, with exaggerated enunciation and articulation. "Realism." "If there's any such thing," Pontius interjected. "Although I'll grant you that in this world, realism could easily be mistaken for pessimism, especially in light of the splendid news we've received from Alexius. But don't worry, Joseph. We won't kill the messenger." Joseph comically raised his eyebrows and wrinkled his forehead. "Are you sure you've got the right office, Roshaya?" Roshaya raised his right hand. "I solemnly swear I did not knowingly lead you into a trap. However, if Governor Pilate chooses to act out of character—" Roshaya's comment was abruptly cut off when a flying cushion struck him in the face. As the red silk cushion landed in his lap, he realized Pontius had thrown it. Out of character, indeed. Roshaya felt so nonplussed he barely noticed Joseph and Zephyrus jeering at his wide-eyed innocence. Pontius leaned forward with an expression of mock intensity. He spoke in a voice somewhere between a hiss and a growl, carefully clipping his words. "Roshaya, in this office, among friends, my name is Pontius. You will speak of me as Pontius. You will address me as Pontius." He struggled to maintain his straight face, feigned though it was. The shock of Roshaya's face inspired Pontius to continue the game. He stiffened his back and struck an absurdly fake authoritarian pose, then leaned forward again, displaying a playful grimace. "That's an order, Centurion." In the suddenly expectant silence of the room, Roshaya felt paramount pressure to respond. He realized he was gaping stupidly, but he could not muster the presence of mind to formulate a sensible reply. Almost from outside his body he heard himself say, "Yes, sir." Another cushion struck him in the face and dropped to the floor, this one coming from Zephyrus. Roshaya gasped. "Pontius! Yes, sir, Pontius!" Rising to his feet in pretended menace, Pontius crept forward and picked up the red cushion from Roshaya's lap. "Roshaya, whether you like it or not, I am your friend." He promptly hit Roshaya over the head with the cushion. Joseph, Pontius, and Zephyrus found themselves completely swept up in the spontaneity of the moment, and they all started pelting Roshaya with cushions. Pontius ran over to a stack of cushions and hurled them one at a time. Joseph and Zephyrus leapt to their feet and joined Pontius, grabbing cushions and pillows from around the office, laughing and playing like little boys. At first Roshaya simply sat in his chair and shielded himself from the assault, but soon realized he was being offered an invitation to be initiated into a circle of friends. He deftly caught a cushion thrown by Joseph and flung it at Zephyrus. Roshaya rose from the chair and asserted himself in the fight. He made several defensive moves worthy of a centurion in battle, spun around and fired a small square pillow directly into the startled face of Pontius. All action stopped. Zephyrus murmured, "If I hadn't been here to witness it." In a flat voice, Pontius asked, "What do you have to say for yourself, centurion?" Roshaya perceived that Pontius was putting on a credible act of seriousness. "But there's that gleam in his eye, and he's my friend. He wants to be my friend." Roshaya placed his fists on his hips. "I would say it serves you right, Pontius." Pontius, Joseph, and Zephyrus erupted into exuberance, and once again cushions flew around the room, this time more in celebration than in play-fighting. No more 3 against 1. Now the game turned into every man for himself. They hid behind chairs and couches, only to emerge in a flurry's soft missile fire. Joseph took mental note of the market value of the fine Chinese silk, flying hither and thither. Dozens of pillows and cushions of various sizes, shapes, and colors, but all of the same superior quality. And then there is the cost of the dye and the labor. For all its appearances, the game remained under control. No plants were damaged, no vases or collector's items were knocked over, no sheets of papyrus were swept off the governor's desk, and not a single cushion flew anywhere near the alabaster statue of Tiberius Caesar in the corner. Pontius shouted, "Hallelujah!" "Pontius, how wonderful!" Joseph called out, dodging a missile from Zephyrus. "You've converted to Judaism! Hallelujah!" They all lost themselves in their mirth, gradually becoming giddy to the point that no one could throw another cushion. They allowed their boisterous energy to subside, and they collapsed into their seats. "Well, that was dignified," said Zephyrus. "Worthy of our positions in life," added Joseph. Pontius chuckled. "At least we've got that out of our systems before Yeshua arrives. Actually, I think he would approve." "Most likely," Zephyrus agreed. "He has a playfulness about him, and he talks about the need to be childlike in our approach to life. I can't wait until we all feel more at ease together, and then we'll see what he's like when he's among friends, when he doesn't have to shoulder the responsibility of being the teacher." "One step at a time," insisted Joseph. "I haven't even met the man yet. Pontius and Roshaya only met with him once." "And I, rather briefly," added Roshaya. "But I really like him. There's something sublime about him, something I couldn't put into words, because I've never encountered it or heard of it, or even imagined it." Roshaya leaned toward Joseph as though conspiring. "Pontius and Zephyrus might not appreciate this, but I think Yeshua could be the Messiah. He's got that kind of nobility and wisdom. And then there's this energy about him, this love." "You're whetting my appetite," Joseph told him. "I hope the rest of you don't mind too much if I dominate the conversation." Pontius barked a loud "Ha!" to show his skepticism. "That man cannot be dominated, in conversation or in anything else. I'm telling you, Joseph, for the first time in your life, you're going to sit in the presence of a genuine spiritual master. You'll find yourself regarding him with such esteem, you'll treat him with deference. You won't even think of trying to monopolize him." Joseph sat back and sighed. "Not that I have any idea what a real spiritual master would be, but I guess I will simply have to wait and see. But meanwhile, Weren't we going to solve all the problems of the empire? What on earth did Alexis tell you in his letter? Zephyrus groaned and started massaging his facial muscles. He says his estimates are turning out to be conservative. He had previously projected that Rome had degenerated to the point that perhaps 10% of the population had become idle, and he thought he was exaggerating with his estimation. Joseph skewed his face into an expression of incredulity, distaste, and curiosity. And now Alexis thinks 10% is a conservative figure? Unfortunately, Pontius moaned, we are deteriorating into a nation of idlers. After all the Herculean effort that has gone into building this empire, Rome is already starting to rot at the core. With most of the known world being put at their disposal, the people of Rome itself are becoming indigents. In addition to the problem with the idlers, Alexis now estimates that it might be half the population that truly cares about only two things, handouts and entertainment. They know nothing and care even less about affairs of state or matters of culture. Zephyrus play-acted what he envisioned as the typical empty-headed Roman citizen. What can the government give me for free? Who's racing at the Circus Maximus today? Can we go pick up our corn allowance now? Let's go to the arena. Oh, the arena, Joseph put in acidically. That's entertainment. There's a bit of a euphemism, isn't it? He picked up the cue from Zephyrus and launched into his own mimicry of the chronic arena-goers. Let's go watch people kill each other. Isn't it fun to watch people bleed and suffer? I like it when the unarmed people are attacked by the wild beasts. My favorite part is when they get eaten. Joseph grumbled in disgust. Entertainment. And it's getting worse, Pontius emphasized. And for a growing number of these people, the worse the better. The promoters are competing to see who can present the most spectacular bloodletting in Rome. Joseph raised his right hand. Now wait. These are the people who regard the Judeans as collectively insane. You've mentioned this notion on a number of occasions. Interesting. I think it's the entire human race that's collectively insane, said Zephyrus. These promoters are merely putting it on display, and they're stooping to new lows. How much lower can it get? Asked Joseph. Whoa, that's not a good question, Zephyrus exclaimed. God, I'm starting to sound like Lazarus. According to Yeshua, when we ask a question like that, we're inviting the cosmos to show us an answer. And it usually does. When people have trouble, they tend to ask how much worse can this get. So the cosmos responds, here's an example. So they ask the same stupid question again, and the cosmos gives them yet another example. Zephyrus watched Joseph's response closely and sensed an openness tempered with doubt. You'll be fascinated by Yeshua's teachings. You might be skeptical now, but you haven't met Yeshua yet. I'll reserve my skepticism, Joseph cautiously responded. I've lived among the Pharisees all my life, so my conceptual framework tends to be a bit limited. I can see Yeshua has been expanding your boundaries, so I will give him a fair opportunity to expand mine. But we're all agreed, Joseph, said Roshiah, that Rome has a problem not being adequately addressed. I don't see how it can bode well for the future to have a burgeoning class of lazy, indulgent ignorami with a sense of entitlement. Wow, that's a mouthful, Pontius muttered. He smiled at Roshaya. Well said, though. And I'm glad you brought up the issue of ignorance. The issue of ignorance alone can give us a picture of what the empire may become. Turning to Joseph, Pontius continued, Alexius and his men have been interviewing people by the hundreds every day. He's appalled at how much common knowledge is no longer common. So we now have a burgeoning class of ignorami, as Roshaya puts it, with no interest in learning. The end result would be obvious. They don't learn anything. They don't know anything. Except raw appetite, Zephyrus mumbled. This paints a bleak picture, Joseph observed, nodding slowly. Being a merchant, I can see elements of this emerging. I can boil it all down to one central problem. The core of the empire no longer produces. It only consumes. But how long can it go on consuming? Asked Roshaya. Generations, answered Pontius. The empire is still young. It has the strength and ambition of youth. And the brazen attitude of youth, Joseph added. He leaned forward in his chair and accompanied his comments with animated gestures. The empire thinks it's immortal. It acts like it can do nothing wrong. But there's a problem at the core of the problem. And the empire is typically blind to it. Unless an all-pervasive miracle happens, the only way the empire can survive is to keep expanding. He threw his arms out in an exaggerated gesture, and then dramatically dropped his hands into his lap. As you've indicated, Pontius, this can go on for generations. But now you have a new generation being born into this infectious attitude of entitlement. And being Judean, I'm quite sensitive to what it feels like to find yourself on the other end of the expansion that feeds the mouth of the all-consuming entitlement mentality of the Roman citizenry. Zephyrus perked up. It's true, Pontius. This is probably the only area where you and I don't see eye to eye. I totally agree with Joseph. It's the imperial attitude. It doesn't matter how many people die to feed the empire. They have to feed us, because we're the Romans, and they're not. It doesn't matter if other people prefer to maintain their cultural integrity and want to use their resources for their own countries. They have to let us take everything we want, because we're the Romans and they're not. Zephyrus rose from his chair and began pacing. Everybody we can possibly conquer somehow magically owes us a living, because we're the Romans and they're not. Even countries that haven't been conquered yet are paying tribute to the empire, because we're the Romans and they're not. You don't need a title like Holiness, Excellency, Lord, or King anymore. All you need is the title Citizen, and you're entitled to whatever rightfully belongs to the rest of the world. Heaving a sigh of resignation, Pontius held out his hands in a sign of helplessness. Oh dear, here we go again. Zephyrus showed no sign of noticing the reactions from Pontius. Flailing his arms around as he paced, Zephyrus continued. It would be one thing if all the resources garnered by the expansion of the empire were placed in the hands of those who, in turn, provided the roads and the aqueducts and such. I would still question that, but at least there would be some semblance of a reasonable exchange. Granted, it would be an exchange made at sword point, but it could somehow be construed to appear fair. He spun around and pointed at the offending document lying on a small table next to the chair he had forsaken. But this letter from Alexius makes it clear where a huge portion of the spoils will be flowing for generations to come. Zephyrus gestured around the room. All four of us are disgusted by the mendicants, the sycophants. Zeph? The tone of voice Pontius used sounded nothing like a governor calling a subordinate to order. His voice contained a sincere plea, friend to friend. Zephyrus ended his rant in mid-sentence and shared a gaze with Pontius. He saw his own pain reflected there. Zephyrus closed his eyes, lowered his head, and sighed. Looking up at Pontius again, he weakly said, "Sorry," with a hapless shrug, and sank back into his chair. His overall expression spoke of dejection that indicated the depths of his passion. The brief but uncomfortable silence was broken by the jocular voice of Roshaya. "You know, Zeph, I think you should learn to express your feelings." Zephyrus could not help but join the other three in a wave of laughter that gradually subsided into lesser waves of chuckles and sighs. "That was good, Rosh," Zephyrus told him. "In the world of artful entertainment, it's known as comic relief." "Speaking of entertainment, Zeph," said Pontius, "you're providing some for an upcoming banquet. How are your plans unfolding?" "Borderline brilliant," Zephyrus gloated. "It promises to be my best to date." "Well, that says a lot," Joseph exclaimed. "If it's really your best to date, it will be well over the borderline." "Thank you," said Zephyrus with a playful bow to Joseph. "I trust you'll enjoy it." Pontius leaned back and placed his hands behind his head. "As you know, Joseph, Zephyrus doesn't like talking about his background. But you know he's originally from Gaul. So it wouldn't be too far a leap for you to assume that he not only has the blood of the Druids in him, but also the blood of the bards." At the sound of the certain rhythmic knock at the door, Pontius and Roshaya looked at each other in bewilderment. "That's my knock," said Roshaya. He groped around, feeling his arms, chest, and legs. "But if I'm not too terribly mistaken, I'm sitting right here." Pontius tilted his head as though he were still listening. "It can't be Gordian, that's not his knock." Roshaya sprang out of his chair and strode to the door. "There's only one way to solve that mystery." He swung the door open, only to be greeted by the smiling face of Hotep. "Forgive me, sir, but that was the only way I could think of to let you know there's an important message for the governor." "Step in, Hotep," Pontius called out, wondering if this action constituted impertinence. A slave imitating the chief centurion's coded knock on the door of the governor's office. Hotep walks curiously close to the line. Pontius paused, noting the looks of delighted bemusement on the faces of Joseph and Zephyrus. Turning back to Hotep with an expression of tolerant leniency, Pontius asked, "What is the message?" Hotep firmly took 3 measured strides into the room and stood still grinning at Pontius. "Forgive me, sir, but I felt you would want to know that Yeshua has arrived as promised, with the 2 beautiful women, Mary and Martha." Pontius held himself in check, and he never carries himself like a slave. "I don't recall Yeshua promising that they would be beautiful." "Of course not, sir," said Hotep. "That particular promise was made by Zephyrus." "Where's Gordian?" asked Roshaya. "I left him in charge," Hotep simply stated, "He just met Yeshua." Hotep held his hands out as if that were all the explanation needed. Pontius and Roshaya were still trying to assess the situation when a raucous guffaw from Zephyrus drew the attention away from Hotep. Slapping his thigh and teetering on the edge of his chair, Zephyrus fixed Pontius with a look of ultimate amusement. "Oh, Pontius, if only you could have seen yourself when you initially met Yeshua. You were so stunned, I was even getting worried about you." "This may be one of those miracles we've been hearing about, sir," Hotep suggested. "To all appearances, Gordian has been temporarily turned into a statue." Joseph, Roshaya, and Zephyrus lapsed into another round of chortling, as Pontius turned his head to look quizzically at Zephyrus. "Was I really that bad?" Zephyrus gave Pontius a playful smirk. "Maybe worse." "Yeshi!" Yeshua turned and saw Pontius striding across the atrium toward him, flanked by Zephyrus on his left and Joseph on his right, with Roshaya immediately behind Pontius and Hotep following Roshaya. "Pontius!" Yeshua walked away from Mary and Martha to exchange enthusiastic greetings with Pontius and Zephyrus. Martha whispered to Mary, "Sure enough, it's Yeshi and Pontius." "Of course," Mary answered absently, absorbed in the sights of the palace interior. "Who would have thought this big stone box would be so sumptuous inside? From the outside you can see nothing but a military stronghold. With the doors and windows wide open, in the warmth of the early afternoon, the sunlight illuminated the marble construction and mosaic floor. There are individual furnishings in here worth more than most people's homes. And this is only the atrium," Martha added. "I guess they need the big stone box to protect this kind of wealth. The praetorium is a gigantic strong box." She touched Mary's arm and whispered, "That must be Joseph beside the governor." Pontius made an open gesture to his right. "Yeshi, I'd like you to meet my dear friend Joseph of Arimathea. You're both famous in the country, so there's no need for further introduction." Pontius watched with a blend of delight and curiosity as the two legendary characters made their first eye contact. Since Pontius could not help but exercise his natural ability to see auras, he marveled at the interplay of energies. He leaned slightly to his left and whispered, "How does Joseph appear to be doing, Zeph?" "It seems as though his insides are dissolving," Zephyrus replied in a soft undertone. Pontius nodded and pursed his lips, soaking in the sight of Joseph. "This is the first time I've seen someone else have this experience, but I keep hearing about it. So this is what it looks like from the outside." "Hello, Joseph," Yeshua murmured softly. "Your spirit is open within you, which is part of why you feel what you're feeling." Pontius did not want to interrupt, but his curiosity moved him to sidle up to Yeshua and ask, "What's the other part?" Yeshua maintained his eye contact with Joseph. "The other part of why this is affecting you so strongly, Joseph, is that the souls recognize each other. The souls remember making arrangements in heaven to meet on earth. This particular type and level of response you're demonstrating will come only from those who are going to be my close friends throughout the years." Joseph blinked a few times, trying to get reoriented. Others will also have strong reactions, Yeshua continued, because the souls know they are about to receive a profound experience. Some will be healed. Some will have their consciousness expanded. Either way, their lives will be changed by meeting me. The soul recognizes me as the agent of their transformation, and the human personality can be shocked upon initial encounter. You fit into all three categories. You will receive healing, your consciousness will expand, and we will become close friends. Yeshua stepped up to Joseph and embraced him, moved to the side, and rubbed his back. You're going through a balancing process right now. Your energies have shifted, so you need to find the new point of equilibrium within your being. Yeshua left Joseph's side to embrace Roshaya. Good to see you, Rosh. It feels like you've done a shift of your own. Part of your rigidity seems to be missing. Pontius and Zephyrus grinned at each other, recalling their pillow fight in the governor's office. But Joseph was still too dazed, so he could not bring himself to partake in their amusement. As soon as the salutations felt fulfilled, Yeshua turned and gestured for Mary and Martha to join the group. Without hesitation, they gracefully crossed the colorful mosaic floor. Even in their unpretentious beige robes, the sisters enhanced the magnificence of the atrium. As promised, Pontius proclaimed, the two beautiful women. Well, guys, I reckon I'm going to have to stop there. And I hope you're enjoying this book as much as I'm enjoying reading it, even though I did get a little bit sort of there for just a little bit. But anyway, I thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye now.